Welcome to the Utah Stories Show. So if you've been following our program for a while, you know we've been covering housing and homelessness. And one thing about reporting on homelessness is you really don't have anything if you don't have numbers, statistics, and data. And really, good reporting consists of all those things. If you don't have the data, you don't really have the facts, and you can't really tell the truth. And so on the program with me today is James Behunin, who has been auditing government agencies for the past 36 years, and for the past 4 years he's been focusing on homelessness in Utah. He's been looking at the homeless resource centers, he's been looking at the homeless agencies, all the money that's going into homelessness, and his job is to help hold that money accountable, hold these homeless resource agencies and the money that's going in to help show a cost-benefit analysis. And James, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
So, I did a real deep dive into the report you produced back in November, the first audit that you did of the resource centers, and I thought it was great because I had never seen anything like that produced from the newspapers. And it's exactly what you need because, I mean, there's just an adage in business and management, you cannot manage what you do not measure. And is that sort of the philosophy?
Yeah. And we've received feedback from legislators, major donors to homeless services, that they really want to know if there's a return on their investment. Mm-hmm. They pour a lot of money into homeless services. And, the question keeps coming back, so what did we get for what we put in there? You're asking for more money, but what was the result of what we spent before? Mm-hmm. And they can say, well, we spent it on homeless services.
Yeah.
And
very vague.
Concern that a lot of us have is that, well, how many of these folks are just cycling in and out of different programs, going from a shelter to a drug treatment program to the street to jail to permanent supportive housing and then back to the shelter.
Mm-hmm. And they don't know.
And we don't know. We ought to have an answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
We have the data. We just haven't done the analysis.
Yeah, I talked to a group of mostly young people in Pioneer Park about 3 weeks ago, and I just asked them, so what have you guys done in terms of, have you gone to the shelters, have you gone to treatment? And they all said, yeah, we've been to the Odyssey House, and then we've been to the resource center. We don't like it. We like camping outside.
Yeah.
We like getting our food stamps, and we like getting, while I was there talking to them, they got 2 different lunches given to them by 2 different nice organizations.
Great.
And then there's like the Nomad Alliance, which comes and gives them tents and sleeping bags or coats, and the Volunteers of America does the same thing. I mean, it seems like we are slowly starting to conform to the model that California, Portland, Seattle are all, going with, which is, let's let these people camp outside, let's let them defecate in the street, let's just help them survive. And what does your organization see as the problem?
Well, our response to that would be, that's fine. It depends on what your goal is. Now, and that's something that I always did when I was legislative staff, is I would say, okay, legislature, you are the policymakers. You've got to decide what it is you're trying to do. We can't measure outcomes unless we know what a positive outcome is.
Yeah.
And so if your goal is to just get them off the street and into housing, then we can measure that. But you need to know that unless they get treatment for that mental illness, unless we do something about their criminal tendencies, you're going to have a pretty messy situation in that housing.
Which is exactly what's happened.
That's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Now, if your goal is just to keep them alive, and we don't care if they're in a shelter or on the street, because a lot of them want to be on the street, then let's make that clear that that's our goal. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's a very good goal.
Well, we know where we're heading toward with that Band-Aid
We've seen
solution.
it in California.
Yeah, you just get more tent camping, more neighborhoods destroyed, more needles everywhere, more people who don't want to walk outside. And it seems like that's the direction we're heading toward. And the way I see this, and you tell me if I'm wrong, downtown Salt Lake City leaders, and especially the homeless leaders, they're very progressive, but the mindset is kind of this libertarian, where let's let them live.
That's an interesting combination when you see liberal, libertarian, because you usually see those on opposite ends of the spectrum.
And I actually used to call myself, liberal libertarian. I'm more liberal when I'm in the city, but I'm more libertarian when I'm in the country. But they're applying libertarian values in the city when it relates to people who are camping in the streets, saying, oh, let's not enforce the no camping ordinance. These people are just trying to survive, which is true. I mean, I've encountered more people who are temporarily homeless who just got priced out of the housing market, and they're just trying to survive, and they have really nowhere else to go. And it's crazy. Like a guy who I talked to a few weeks ago was living in a tent, and it was 105 degrees outside. He's like, I just lost everything. I don't have anything. I was living in my car, and I'm here now. But then they're camping alongside of people who are maybe long-term heroin addicts and been long-term chronic homeless people. And then at the same time, you've got your wolves who are preying on these people, feeding them, giving them drugs, and committing crimes, and all sorts of, like, rape is going on, and muggings. And so it's like, you
cannot imagine how awful it is in those camps.
It is,
the kind of abuse and victimization that goes on there, the filth. The Pioneer Park Coalition, as we drafted this plan, we came to the position that's not healthy, that's not acceptable.
No.
That it will only lead to our community turning into what we see in San Francisco. You'll see businesses closing down. You'll see businesses leaving and residents leaving.
And they are.
And so we've got to do something. And the option that we have envisioned is that we focus on treatment. But to get there, we first got to get them out of those encampments. And so we have to have the shelter space and space in, as you mentioned, that some of these folks, they don't want to live in the shelter. And I've been inside those shelters. I can't blame them.
Yeah. Back in 2015, I went through the downtown shelter, and it was absolutely awful. Maybe you went through it about that same time.
I went through it at 1 a.m. Let me tell you, nobody's sleeping in that shelter at 1 a.m.
Really?
It's chaos.
Really?
A lot of drugs.
People just using drugs.
I saw drugs in the shelter at 1 a.m.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I asked this question yesterday in your press conference. So that property was located next to the Weigland Center, next to St. Vincent's, next to the 4th Street Clinic. It's like the ideal location in terms of being near all the resources. Yeah. But it was outdated. The model, the management was terrible. It was all it was obviously, Scott said, you had the women's shelter, the men's shelter, and the children all kind of side by side, and the children would get off a bus, and then they'd be surrounded by these homeless men, and it was a bad situation. But the property itself, why couldn't have that just become a different usage, a different
you could have ripped
model?
It down and built another one. There was concern about having 1,000 people in one place. Homeless people, that's quite a burden.
Yeah.
And the burden on the community is pretty massive.
But isn't the burden greater now?
Now the Haven for Hope. And so we went. I wasn't part of that rationale. We made a decision. Our leaders made a decision back then to divide it up into 4 different facilities. Mm-hmm. So you got the family shelter down in Midvale, the men's shelter, the men and women's shelter, and the women's shelter. So you got 4 different facilities. Used to be just the family shelter part-time and the downtown shelter. Having it all in one location, there's some advantages to that. That's what they do in Haven for Hope in San Antonio, which we really like.
I've been looking at that.
But it's really well controlled. They have their own police force on the premises.
Wow.
It's well managed and well controlled, and they're not all living in one room like they were in the downtown shelter. You had the building was not designed to manage that population. You had some rooms where there were like maybe 14 bunks, and you had another room where there might have been 80 bunks.
Yeah.
And in corners that you couldn't see who's doing what in the back corner, which is dangerous. Mm-hmm. And there's victimization going on in the back corner there. And so it just wasn't tolerable. There needed to be they need to be in a facility where they can get the services they need, and you couldn't give them the services in that building. So now we went with the idea of breaking it up and provide services, and these new buildings are wonderful. You've got kitchens, and you've got a nursing station there, and then places for service providers to come in. And you got your mental health provider in one back room, and so a lot of the services are in that building, which is great.
But almost every homeless person I've interviewed who's been there says it feels like a prison. They say it feels like you're locked down and you better do exactly what they say or you're kicked out. And obviously you can't bring contraband in. Yeah. The difference between those facilities and SwitchPoint's model is SwitchPoint grants their tenants the trust to not feel like they're going through airport security. What do you feel like is the better model?
I have been to SwitchPoint, and they don't have that same magnetometer at the front door, but they have drug sniffing dogs that they don't have at the. They say they bring them in on occasion to the Salt Lake Resource Centers, but in Washington, in St. George, they have drug sniffing dogs, and they have the police on premises visiting on occasion. I think they're more control. There's more control in SwitchPoint, at least in the St. George facility that I visited, than we see in Salt Lake. They say no, absolutely not. You're not going to bring drugs into our place. Well, they say that too in Salt Lake, but they still get in there. They're getting in there. You can't. And I agree with the philosophy is you can't completely frisk everybody. Mm-hmm. And so they're bringing it in their underwear someplace, in their socks, and they're getting it through. Except in the facility in Lantern House in Ogden. They make them take all their stuff and put it in a locker before they get into the dormitory, which is an interesting idea. Including their clothes.
And they don't check to see if they've got drugs.
Oh, they do.
Oh, they do.
They pretty well isolate the drugs. You want to go get your backpack, it's outside. You go outside. So,
well, the thing that I find difficult with the homeless resource centers and the way those have panned out is obviously those areas where they put them have become crime-ridden. And the neighborhoods have really declined and deteriorated. And you have really good statistics about that.
That was promise. A promise was made that we would not let that happen, and hasn't.
So who is holding that promise to you?
Okay, when the facilities were built, the owners. There's an operator of the facility, which is the Road Home in most cases. I think VOA is running the women's shelter now. Mm-hmm. But two of them are run by the Road Home. I think VOA had the same situation, though. They had to go to the city and submit a safety and security plan. And in that plan, you read how they will monitor activities on the street around their building. And it's like a certain distance, like 300 yards or half mile. I don't know what it was, but
they'll be responsible for any crime going on.
If our residents are out there causing havoc on the neighboring businesses, we will take responsibility. It's in the conditional use permit. That security plan was adopted as part of the permit that they had to get from the city to build the place.
Okay.
And so...
And the city is the one who licenses that permit.
Yeah.
Not the state.
Not the state. It's the city. And so the city, it's on the city and the provider to do what they said they were going to do.
And is the state giving a whole bunch of money to these providers as well as the city?
Some money, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, don't ask me to explain the financing. We do not have time to sort through all
well,
of
the
the
point
different
is, like,
sources of money.
This is kind of how I framed it when I was thinking about it. The Utah State Legislature holds the power of the majority of the taxpayers' purse, and the city is the entity who is holding the NGOs of the Road Home and the Shelter of the Homeless and the Volunteers of America accountable for what's going on at those shelters. The Utah State Legislature.
Are they?
I mean, no, obviously they're not, because they're not shut down. I mean, if
you can't really ask the legislature. You can't go around saying the legislature is doing this or that. Only when they pass laws, a bill, or appropriations, that's when they speak.
Yeah.
And so you may hear some legislators say they're really frustrated with this or that, but that's not the legislature.
Well, I look at the Pioneer Park Coalition, and you, Scott Howell, Greg Hughes, are all former members of the Utah State Legislature. This is kind of an initiative to say, okay, it's not just Salt Lake City's problem. This is Utah's problem, because a lot of the homeless people from all over the state of Utah, they'll congregate to Salt Lake City because that's where the services are. And a lot of the homeless people I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, I'm from Magna, or I'm from Duchesne, or I came up here from Cedar City because I heard they had a little better resources. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really everybody's problem.
I've talked to several hundred of these folks, and they not only come from all over Utah, they come from all over the world. We had a woman right next to our conference, our press conference yesterday, who was from Sudan. She's terribly mentally ill. I don't know if it's drug addiction or mental illness. It's probably some of both. But incoherent, babbling, and showing signs of severe mental illness. Yeah. And she's from Sudan.
Yeah. So and with our open border, you get all sorts of people, I'm sure.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't respond to their needs.
Yeah. And so my point is that I've talked to, for example, Gene Hill from Catholic Diocese. I talked to Glenn Bailey from the Crossroads Urban Center. Yeah. And they say we need more resources. Like you don't want to the legislature doesn't want to acknowledge that the problem is a shortage of resources. It's not a shortage of accountability. It's a shortage of money, because they cannot afford to do the wraparound services because they're not paying caseworkers enough money. And if they could, then the outcomes would be better.
The caseworkers are not paid enough. They're not well trained enough and experienced. This is an extremely difficult population to serve.
Oh yeah.
And in a lot of cases, we're paying them like $15 an hour. Someone right out of the social, a degree of bachelor's degree of social work, and we're saying, oh, we're going to give you this population, and they may have schizophrenia, they may have severe drug addiction. We don't know their mental state, because after sleeping on the street for a few years, it's really hard on their mental health. Even if they don't have mental illness, they're going to have poor mental health.
So you don't disagree that there's a problem with resources?
That population needs better services, yes. But are we spending our money efficiently? And this is a question that's unanswered. I would love to somehow figure this out. If this system were efficient, how far would the current $200 million go towards meeting the needs of this population if we prioritized? I think we're probably not using, we probably need more resources, but we are not using the resources we have efficiently. And so I say, well,
Because the outcomes aren't changing.
Let's look at. Here's an example I used in their press conference yesterday. We put someone into the TOSA program, which is one of the 5 or 6 that we think is a really good model. We ought to be doing more of these.
What's TOSA?
The Other Side Academy.
Oh, yeah.
This is more, they don't take people who are mentally ill. Mm-hmm. They will take people with drug addiction. And it's a 2-year program. But they have a fantastic record of getting people into a working environment. There's a lot of community support. And they make people face up to their history and their issues.
And the neighborhood around the Other Side Academy is fantastic.
Yeah,
the neighbors love it.
They don't affect the neighborhood.
Exactly.
So I did a study at their request. They said, "Hey, can you help us, figure out how well we're doing?" And so I said, "I'll do a study of your outcomes." And so I did that, and I took the 2 years before they started the program, and there was like 80 of them, and just in those 2 years, those 80 people had like 700 criminal offenses in 2 years.
Which costs taxpayers a huge amount of money.
It costs taxpayers. Just imagine, every one of those cases required a police officer, a district attorney, and a judge, and possibly some jail time. Every time they come through. And we see them coming through time and time again. And that's one of the issues we raise is, why are we keep imposing this expense on ourselves? If we dealt with the problem, we wouldn't have this ongoing expense.
Yeah.
So
that's a great
there's
point.
there's a need there to be more efficient. I looked at their experience of these 80 people after they get out. It went from 2 years after they were there. It went from 700 offenses to something like 95. And so by being in TOSA, these 80 individuals were transformed into law-abiding citizens mostly. Mm-hmm. And the net effect of that program on their lives resulted in a savings, you might say, of 600 criminal offenses on our criminal justice system and on our businesses and residents. So
couldn't quantify that into dollars?
No, we can't.
Because you don't know how much each offense costs on average.
What's put a price on the trauma of getting assaulted downtown.
Yeah. So also the victim side of it too is huge.
So, but the point is, they go from being massive tax burdens to taxpayers, probably.
Yeah, and so we have a population right now of about, and the thing is, we don't have the data. That's one of the big concerns we wrote in that legislative audit report, is we don't have the data to really know the breakdown of this population. And in this report, we suggest we go and do that. We got to get this data. Mm-hmm. And we've got some researchers lined up to do that. We just got to get the funding. But let's say we knew how many there are. A year or two ago, I thought it was about 1,300 that are hardcore, on the street, in and out of the shelter, that are mentally ill, drug addicted. A lot of them are committing crime, not all of them. Mm-hmm. But the ones that really need a lot of services. That 1,300 it could be 1,500 now, because the trend line is going way up. But let's say it's 1,300. 1,300, we ought to be able to provide the treatment for them, get them over their issues. If we're really good at what we do, like TOSA is, like the Haven for Hope is in Texas, if we could get after their treatment needs, stop having them just cycling in and out of these shelters in the facilities and the jails, we think it would be a worthwhile investment up front towards a better life for them and less impact on our community in the future.
Yeah, what you're talking about is actual rehabilitation, not what they usually happens in prison.
Yeah. But it gets back to, what is our priority? Do we have the goal to really transform people's lives? And that's the position that we as a Pioneer Park Coalition have made. Now, in the larger community of the homeless service providers, I'm not sure that's always their goal. They say it is, but they don't measure it. We don't track outcomes that way. And we think if it was really a top priority, we wouldn't see a headline saying we got 150 million we're putting into housing and shelters. We'd say we've got 100 million that we're putting into housing and shelters, and we got 50 million we're putting into services. Medicaid will pay for a lot of the services. Drug addiction and the mental health can be paid through Medicaid. It requires we jump through a lot of hoops to get them qualified. It's probably worth doing, but Medicaid will not pay for the case managers.
Really?
The staffing of our program to go
Which
and connect them with
Which is the most important role.
Yeah, and that case manager is really critical. Interesting thing to think about. I don't know how it affects our analysis, but the Other Side Academy does it largely without public money.
Peer-to-peer support rather than case manager.
Most of what they do is they've got income from their businesses. These guys go out and work, which is, I think work is therapy.
Yeah.
But they also have a lot of donations. Haven for Hope in Texas, majority of it is private donations.
And is that near the city of San Antonio?
It's
right in the city?
Right downtown.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. So
it was an old warehouse district, business district that was kind of falling apart, and they went in there and said, "We're just going to buy it all up."
Yeah, let's look at this video real quick of Haven for Hope. I've got it up on my screen. Okay. It's a 22-acre campus with 17 buildings and 250 employees. Can you show this? Troy?
Yep, you're on.
Okay, I'm going to play this clip.
For the community as well.
This is where around 1,700 people call home. This is Haven for Hope.
And the hope is here. It is. You got to want it and do it and apply yourself a little bit. That's all they ask. And it's all there for you.
And one of the things that I love about Haven is all the lives that we save, all the wonderful stories that we hear.
The Transformational Campus is one of the main parts of Haven for Hope, a place in San Antonio that offers housing and support services to the homeless population.
One time, a person said to me, everything I needed was here, including love.
Kenny Wilson is the president and CEO of Haven for Hope. He says they've housed and helped thousands of people.
I've watched a metamorphosis take place, not just the way they look to me or others, but the way they see themselves.
And he's seen the impact firsthand on the streets.
We do know that since Haven opened in 2010, homelessness downtown has decreased a little more than 80%.
While the data shows an overall decline, one statistic doesn't sit right with Wilson. The number of homeless families in the area increased by 18%.
But when a family comes to us with a child, children, a parent or parents, and they say, we're living in the car, we can't do it anymore, we do not say, I'm sorry, we're full. You can't come here.
Providing housing, education, and support services to all of these people doesn't come cheap at $20 million a year.
A lot of money.
Worth it?
Absolutely.
We ought to be able to afford $20 million a year. They do $20 million, and they said they had 1,700. I just said I think we have like 1,300, maybe 15 now. I'm sure we could get $20 million a year out of our existing funds.
So where would you put this? 27 acres and 17 buildings. I mean, that's not going to come cheap. Where would you put this kind of campus?
I don't know. That's the decision. It's almost like we've made a commitment to the approach we have now, which is to spread them out into places all over the valley.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like this is crime-ridden around the place.
Oh, it's not. I've been there. I met this gentleman and his staff, and it's very impressive. There are very few homeless downtown there. Now, I did press them and say, "Well, come tell me." I know there's some people who don't want to have anything to do with your operation. And they said yes. They are hiding out. They tend to go out of town into the county. You know, there's a lot of land outside of San Antonio, and they're just hiding out. But you don't see them. And they do their best to go out and reach out to them still.
Yeah.
So you can't say they've eliminated it. But I think we would be thrilled to have that kind of operation here. But it would mean that we would go in a very different direction than we have now. And right now, the thing is, I don't think people would really mind putting money into a program like that. I think, and people talk about, wow, how much would this cost? Well, my sense is that the donor world, and I've talked to the major donors in this state who donate to this, and I know the legislature's position on this. There is plenty of money for programs that work, and if
we had a $2 billion overage surplus,
yeah,
and most of that had to go to water because the Great Salt Lake's drying up, I guess.
I don't think we want to be competing with those kinds of issues, but I think what we could do is if we put together a plan that mirrored that Haven for Hope kind of operation, where we can show positive outcomes, people transforming their lives. And I think, your Utah stories, you ought to think about in the future, highlighting some of these success stories.
Yeah,
that people would be rushing in to say, hey, how can I help? You got a little feel of that when we started doing this tiny home thing out the other side Academy is building out on Indiana Avenue.
Yeah, we had Samuel Granny on.
There's a lot of people that are just excited about that. Now, if you had something like that, now and mind you, the tiny village is not going to solve. It's just a narrow sliver of our homeless population that would
because
benefit from
you need 10 of those. That's 500.
Yeah, but that's
beds.
Also not something that everybody is going to be drawn to. There is a population of homeless that will love the tiny village, but it's not going to address a lot of the folks that are on the street right now who just don't like to be told what to do. You're going to be told what to do at the village. You're going to have to follow some rules. And so for this other population, we're going to have to tread a little more lightly. Haven for Hope has that option where you come in and they will send you to the best fit program that meets your needs. And I think if we were to develop an array of different programs.
So on the campus, you come in and it can be a place for recently priced out of the market homeless people, a place for seniors, a place for
most of those are very
addicts.
Brief stays, and they get them right into housing. They don't spend a lot of time at the ones that they really invest a lot of time in are those that come with a lot of treatment needs. But yeah, if you have a temporary housing crisis, you may stay at the shelter for a month and then move on. And they have all these housing units lined up. They will go to a landlord and say, "We will lease your 8-plex permanently. We will have tenants in there. We just want every one of your units, and we will keep them filled up." And so that family that you just mentioned, if they don't have a lot of treatment needs, they would line that up and have them in there. We have that kind of thing already. We had them on their show. We have rapid rehousing.
The thing I wanted to also share with you, another clip, is of a 3 people I interviewed. I mentioned one of them, a guy who lost everything and he was living out of his car, a senior man. He was probably 65 years old. And then with him was a guy who moved here from Logan, Utah, sold his townhome, thought he could find a place to rent. He's a painter.
Yeah.
Couldn't find a place. And then a young mother who was in her probably early 20s, who her rent increased, and she was just priced out of the market. She couldn't find another place. And my guess is she admitted she had some mental health issues as well. Yeah. But they were all recently homeless, and they could not find any service providers for their needs. Let me see if I can find this clip real quick here. Homeless at Sugar House. Okay. Let me know when you're ready, Troy. came when?
I came about 14 months ago.
And you're still looking for housing?
Yeah, I had about 12 grand, something like that. Just ended up spending it all at a motel.
Where'd you come from?
Logan.
Wow.
I thought I'd have a place in maybe a month at the most. Me and my fiance came down here and we reapplied probably 30 different properties. Never got in. Our credit scores were below 600 and we had a pet.
So the city's building like housing for chronically homeless people, but they're not building housing for, working people.
Low barrier housing. So the city is building housing for chronically homeless, but because it is not a low barrier housing, you have to have a decent credit score. And then you can't make over a certain amount of money, but you have to have a job. And there's just these ridiculous requirements that nobody that's been out here for more than a month is ever going to meet. Before I ended up out here myself, I was volunteering with the Nomad Alliance. I was out here every other weekend, and then every Wednesday, if not more often, helping people out, doing the DMV appointments, trying to help people find jobs. But when you can't shower regularly, you don't have access to water or power, and you have to take everything you own with you or risk it all being gone when you try to come back because the city's going to take it, or somebody else who doesn't know how they're going to make ends meet is going to take it. It's almost impossible to get out of this situation. Almost everybody out here has poor credit or some kind of criminal record that prevents regular housing. And when the city puts in housing that's not low barrier, but is low income, it still doesn't make any difference. Mm-hmm. It just makes it lets them look better without actually.
So makes them look better without actually doing anything. Do you see it that way? I mean, these people were all recently homeless. I guess my first question is, what should they be doing?
So I understand that lady had kids with her. Is that right?
Her kids were staying with her ex.
Oh,
so
okay.
She was
we don't know all the issues that they have, but it looks like you said that she had some mental illness. Mm-hmm. She needs to get stabilized, and that was what our intention was with the resource center, and that they would go to the resource center for a month or two, get stabilized, see what your needs are, diagnose their mental illness, and get on a plan of action to get them over whatever those obstacles are to self-sufficiency, to a job. In her case, she probably needed some treatment. And so she would stay at the resource center for a month or two, ideally, and then should be off to some kind of deeply affordable housing that is supported by one of our service providers. And they call this permanent supportive housing. That's the ideal. And those kinds of programs can work.
Yeah, but according to her and Kevin, Brooke and Kevin, it's not working now. Neither of them were able to get the support they needed. I mean, obviously, right now the system is broken. The resource centers are broken.
Yeah.
But under what you guys are proposing, what would she be able to have?
Okay.
That's different.
So she needs to get into housing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that housing needs to have some structure to it. Our big beef with a lot of the permanent supportive housing is that there isn't much structure, much safety. There's drug use going on in those facilities. It's just not meeting their needs.
Well, if say you were in charge of these facilities, what would you do right now?
Well, first thing I'd do is I'd have 24/7 security. Mm-hmm. I would say we're going to do some drug testing. We're not going to throw you out if you're using drugs, but let's monitor your drug use, see how well you're doing in progressing and getting off drugs. I'd have a lot of selectivity on who goes into different types of facilities. You don't want to have this woman in there with, some men who are, tending to
victimize women.
Yeah. Which is not something we're really good at right now.
Yeah. You mentioned in one of the permanent supportive housing facilities, a woman was raped.
Yeah.
And there's drug trafficking, sex trafficking going on. We have an inside source. It was verified by another inside source that's happening at the new Magnolia apartments. Someone
was arrested for prostitution at the Magnolia.
Yeah, was using it as a...
So the first thing we got to do is provide a lot more structure and safety in these facilities. But yeah, she could be fine there. Another problem with this whole thing, and this is what we brought up in our audit report, was there's really not enough flow through the system. I was talking to the folks at Palmer Court, and I said, you got 200 units here. How many of those units would be available if you had a place for your residents to go, those who are ready to move on? And they said 15. We got 15 people who, if they had a Section 8 housing voucher, could move out into the community. It would just subsidize their housing. And so for 15 people, the lack of 15 housing vouchers, we don't even have to build the building. We just have to give them a voucher, subsidize their rent, and they can move out, freeing up 15 slots for 15 people who are in the resource center.
Yeah.
So we need to keep
They're just not
people moving.
You said there was people there who've been there for a year, right?
Where? There are people at Palmer Court who have been there since it was started 12 years ago.
Oh, I was talking about the resource centers, but Palmer Court too, 12 years.
Palmer Court has some there, 12 years.
Wow.
The resource center has people who've been there for a year, yeah. And so we need to get, the resource centers were not designed to have people for a year.
Mm-hmm.
They need to move on. We don't have places for them to move on to because people are stuck in those places and not moving on to what's next.
So the whole system's clogged right now.
Yeah,
and I know we're kind of running out of time, but the last point is, wouldn't truly deeply affordable housing be a big solution to this huge problem as well?
If you manage it right, yes. The problem is, so often we are so rushing out there to build more housing that we don't, like the Magnolia. You brought the Magnolia up. We spent $265,000, and that was before prices really went up. They were probably $300,000 now, to build those units
per unit.
Per unit,
17.6 million or something like that.
And it's not run very well. You have people coming in and invading an apartment and attempting to rape a woman. You've got drug use, and you go around the neighborhood. And I've taken pictures of around the neighborhood. These facilities attract that population. People have friends. Homeless people have friends in the apartment, and so they come and they're drawn there and they're camping out on the streets.
Yeah,
in
just
the neighborhood.
down the street, there's people now
and so
camping
you've
out.
created a mess for the neighborhood. Now that's not our vision. Our vision is we have more of these facilities, but they're well organized. They are treatment rich and providing services. They're structured, and they create the environment where people can heal. We do need more of those, but it's going to take some discipline and accountability. Mm-hmm. That's why we keep getting back to accountability.
Well, I totally agree, and I gotta say, I love that you guys had the courage to come forward with this plan. I think it's a great start. Where I've tried to have on Michelle Flynn. She was booked to come on. She canceled when I started criticizing Magnolia, when the information started coming to me about what was going on there. Obviously, there's got to be a better plan than what we have now. And so I'd encourage everybody to go check out the Pioneer Park Coalition plan, the grand plan. It's a plan to reduce homelessness and crime. And can people just find it on your website?
We have been mailing it out. We've Not right now. We are trying
Not
to
yet.
get that up and going. Our website has not been well managed as of late, and we will get that on there.
Yeah, well, it's a great thing. I think that we definitely need a new plan, and I've been watching these abatements, and they're so heart-wrenching and tough to watch, and I have a lot of compassion for the homeless, especially the ones really trying to get off the streets that are really getting sucked into a much worse lifestyle than what they had before, and it's time to make a big change.
So what we've done is we've taken this QR code, and we send this out, and you can post this on your site.
Okay.
And so anybody can get the document if they just go to this QR code.
Okay.
Would
we
you
can
like?
do that.
I can email that to you.
Yeah.
And you can post it on your website. We're trying to use this technology to make it easy for people to access this report.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, James.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
And thank
really
you for
appreciate it.
your Utah stories and all the wealth of information you're putting out there. It's really
Yeah, good. I guess I've got sucked into this. I don't feel like I'm that interested in anything else. I think it's the most important issue, homelessness and housing, and for you to retire, kind of come out of retirement.
I should be
do
retired.
this.
I should be playing golf every day, but I end up doing homeless things. So.
Yeah, but I think it's great lending your
Yeah.
services to this. It's so important.
Thank you.
So appreciate what you do.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So next on the program, I hope I have this right. Amy Hawkins. Amy Hawkins is going to be with us. She's the chairperson of the Ballpark Neighborhood Council, and she's going to talk about what's happened to that neighborhood. It's really sad because the neighborhood has deteriorated a lot, and she's going to be with us in about 10 minutes, so I hope you stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you'd like to support Utah Stories, go check out our subscription page. It's $2 a month to subscribe to the magazine. This really helps us out right now because we're having a hard time with the labor shortage, getting drivers, getting the magazine, and keeping it free. Printing costs have gone up, and this really keeps the voice of local Utah in your home and prevents the tech censors from censoring good content, which we find is happening more and more often these days. So we'll be right back with Amy Hawkins, and we hope to see you on the flip side. Welcome back to the Utah Stories Show. So a lot has happened since the homeless resource centers have been opened, and not a lot of people have been talking about it. And well, it depends on what circles you go around in, but I've not seen so much about it on the mainstream local media. Especially something I've noticed is what's happened in the Ballpark neighborhood near where the Gail Miller Resource Center has been located. The neighborhood wasn't so super great before the resource center was there, but it was flourishing. It was decent. But now you go to that neighborhood and it's really deteriorated quickly. And there are some terrible things going on there. And so on with me in the program in this next 20 minutes is Amy J Hawkins. She is a resident of the Ballpark neighborhood, and she's also the chairperson of the Ballpark Neighborhood Community Council, and she also serves on the Pioneer Park Coalition Board. Thanks for coming on, Amy.
You're doing a great job there reciting my resume. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you could make it. So tell me first, what made you first get attracted to living in the Ballpark neighborhood, and what have you seen since you moved there?
I think it seemed like a great buy, right? I was a biomedical researcher, and it seemed like the right price for the right proximity to the School of Medicine. I was new to the Salt Lake Valley, relatively new. I'd only lived here a couple years, and I was really excited about the possibility of getting up to the med school via tracks, and my townhome's only a couple blocks from a track station. Love that accessibility. So it seemed like a great fit, and it seemed like a neighborhood that was on the up and up. You know, you could tell my townhome was new. It seemed like other new projects were going up.
What year was it?
This was 2013.
Okay.
So
you came here
moved in 2014.
Did you come here from someplace else?
I was born in Washington, D.C., and I moved here from Richmond, Virginia. And I moved here to work for the University of Utah.
Yeah, and so D.C. is really urban. You thought, I'll go to the urban center of Salt Lake, and that'll be cool and exciting and fun. And
yeah, I wanted to go where there was a really diverse mix of people. That seemed important and also to be closer to the U. You know, I worked in a what we call a wet lab, right, where there's petri dishes and cells. I knew that I was going to be going into the lab maybe at weird times to treat my cells with chemotherapeutic drugs or, to get them at strange times. And so I knew I didn't want to be commuting in from very far to do that kind of work.
And you wanted to ride tracks, not drive a car.
Well, I wanted that to be an option because, weather was so novel to me coming from Richmond, Virginia. There, if it ever, even if there was a hint of snow, there was just exciting panic, and everybody went to the grocery store to buy the holy trinity of, bread, milk, and eggs. So, and nobody has that conversation here with the same level of intensity. People talk about skiing.
Yeah.
What is that?
You get up to the mountains when there's powder.
Yeah. Powder is a different thing. Yeah. There it's just wet.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting. And it's common that the people who are attracted to Utah want to live in the urban core because that's what most people want to do. It's so Utah, Salt Lake growing up here, it was like the population of downtown Salt Lake City, I think it really suffered during the 80s, late 70s and 80s. There was white flight and people were moving out to the suburbs. And we didn't have an urban population to speak of. But now you see all these apartments going up. You see a lot of people want to be a part of the live, work, and play environment downtown. And I'm starting to get it because now we got a bar life a little bit. We've got walkability in some places. But what have you seen now since you've moved there since 2013? Has it been a gradual decline, or when did it start getting really bad?
I think we really started to notice something during Operation Rio Grande, right? That was when the conversation really started of like, whoa, there's an influx of transient folks coming through the neighborhood that we hadn't seen before. And we could,
This was before Operation Rio Grande that you saw this, or
during?
Oh, during.
During, okay. Right. And I know this was sort of in everybody's consciousness because at the same time of Operation Rio Grande, we also knew that there was a conversation of where are the new homeless resource centers going to go. And I was actively a part of those conversations of trying to envision what are the criteria that we should use to select a site? How far away should it be from an interstate? How far away should it be from a liquor store? What other things do we want to make sure that a homeless resource center is distant from? Daycares, schools. We know that we don't want homeless resource centers to be too close to things because we acknowledge that there are impacts usually, right?
And so when it was discussed to put it in the Ballpark neighborhood, you were part of that discussion, and were you okay with it?
We, at the time, accepted that at least one resource center was likely to be inevitable. And so we thought that if we were positive about it, that would probably be to our benefit.
Mm-hmm. And you regret that now?
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because I see other neighborhoods that effectively pushed back and got resource centers pushed out of their neighborhoods.
Sugar House. Yeah.
And I regret it because we hosted many conversations at the Ballpark Community Council month after month. Architects, the operators, many people involved in the planning of the Homeless Resource Center. And we were told, here are the elements that are going to prevent this resource center from being anything like what you're concerned about. It will be nothing like the downtown shelter, nothing like it. You will see no queuing in your neighborhood like you're concerned about seeing around Pioneer Park, because here are the architectural elements that will prohibit it. There will be an operating agreement, and that will prevent any kind of criminality in the neighborhood surrounding the Homeless Resource Center. There will be a cap of 200 people, and that cap will be sacred, because we know one of the reasons why the downtown shelter didn't succeed is it became overcrowded, and that overcrowding was detrimental to a sense of security inside the center. It became too crowded, and so it was unsafe, and there were too many different kinds of people in the center. So there were too many,
overlapping communities, right. Demographics. Yeah.
Demographics, right? Like single men and families shouldn't necessarily be in the same kind of center together, for example. There are going to be walls of a certain height that prevent, outdoor areas of the center from being next to businesses next door. They won't be affected.
And Gail Miller is men and women, or is it just
Yes.
men? It's men and women.
Mm-hmm. Have these promises have been broken. The last one will be broken this year. The cap. We have now been told that our homeless resource centers will be flexed, and rather than the sacred cap of 200 people, the promise that will never be broken, don't worry about it, it will be fine. We'll see 250 people this year.
Wow.
And that doesn't sound necessarily like a big difference, but this is the beginning, right? This is the beginning of, and frankly, originally the first bill that went through the state legislature this past year, this current year, this spring, suggested that the center should flex up to 50% of what was allowable by the fire code. And apparently we were told by the fire marshal at the time that the fire code allows those buildings to hold up to, I heard at one point up to 1,100 people.
Jeez.
So that's recreating the road home exactly in our neighborhoods.
So I want to play.
Repulsive.
Yeah, I want to play the clip of you speaking yesterday at Pioneer Park. It was your turn to talk about what you've experienced and seen around your neighborhood. Are we okay to play that now? Okay.
Hello, my name is Amy J Hawkins. I serve as chair of the Ballpark Community Council, but today I'm speaking as an executive board member of the Pioneer Park Coalition. I've been asked to comment on the impact that unsheltered populations have on neighborhoods like Ballpark. I think the press is well aware of the Ballpark neighborhood's serious and now long-standing disproportionate issues with violent crime. Some of these crimes involve people experiencing homelessness as victims or as perpetrators. Sometimes they involve the criminal elements known to prey on and circulate among the vulnerable. If you read the report, that you'll note per capita, the Ballpark neighborhood experiences 9 times the rate of homicides compared with the whole of Salt Lake City. Yeah, I'll say that again, 9 times the rate of homicides compared to the whole of Salt Lake City. That's astonishing. It's worth noting, too, that some of those murder victims have been people experiencing homelessness themselves. A man shot to death in the middle of the street in Ballpark. another in a tent on the side of the road. But property crime and quality of life issues have taken a toll on our families in Ballpark. My neighbors tell me that when their kids' bikes are stolen over and over again, or they keep finding needles in their yards, or when their 11-year-old is solicited for sex in the middle of the day, they start to seriously question if the neighborhood is the right place for their family.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. An 11-year-old was solicited for sex outside your neighborhood?
Well, inside my neighborhood,
Inside
yeah.
your neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
And these murders, this is the murder rate, the highest murder rate by far in Salt Lake City now, too.
I believe so. I haven't calculated it I don't know the population of every neighborhood. I haven't calculated it individually, but.
So what is it about the Homeless Resource Center that has brought on all this crime?
It's a complicated problem, but I think it's the population that preys on the vulnerable that's allowed to circulate around them. Because we don't enforce camping in Salt Lake City, that means that some of the smaller encampments that exist in our neighborhood, that essentially means that just drug dealing and sex work can happen freely in our streets. And there's not much that folks can do to enforce it because it looks like loitering. And what can you do about loitering?
Have you tried calling the police a lot?
Yeah.
Do they respond?
Sometimes.
Yeah, but you see the same faces, the same people doing the drug trafficking and the sex work, and
yeah. I mean, what do you think police can do?
Well, I mean, I would think they could have a stakeout, or they could go undercover, or.
Oh, do you think they have time for that?
Yeah, you would wish.
Do you think we still have a vice squad?
Do we not?
I know at one point we collapsed our vice squad into patrol because our response times were so long for our priority 1 and priority 2 crimes that we needed to pull officers from some of our specialized units because we needed somebody to respond to calls.
Yeah, I can't say I know many of the details of what's going on behind the scenes at SLCPD, but I talked to David Ibarra about this, and he's had incidences in his building, yes. And he it was like 20 minutes, and it was a high priority call.
We have a lot of arson in Central 9th, and some buildings have been attacked multiple times. And then, a local business owner there told me recently in the past month that he had to hold somebody who had set his building on fire and the landscaping around it in a chokehold for 8 minutes until police and fire got there. And that's a long time.
Jeez.
That's a long time.
Yeah. So, and you, later on in this little speech you gave, you said a lot of the people around the situation want to frame it as an either-or situation where you either are compassionate to the homeless or you're compassionate to your neighbors, and somehow you're on one side or the other. You can't serve both. And I think that's a really great point, because we all want to be compassionate to the homeless people, especially those who are essentially just trying to get back on their feet or trying to beat their mental illness or their addiction. Nobody doesn't want to see them getting help. But there's this population of people who are either along with the homeless population or just simply preying on them, who are committing these criminal acts all the time. And according to a woman who's coming on the podcast next week, Danielle they're getting really serious felonies reduced to probations, and they're not getting locked up in prison or jail. Is that what you're seeing as well?
In some cases, yes. I know in the North Temple community, that community's resorted to just hiring private security.
Wow.
Constantly, not individual businesses, but, an entire 6-block swath of businesses have come together to hire 24/7 security. And, it costs them thousands of dollars a month, but it's worth it to them. And it's
North Temple has been a hot spot for a very long time. So
Ballpark and North Temple do a lot of, we exchange a lot of, I understand how you feel, and I think coming from each other, it means more than other areas of the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't like to think that different areas of our city are going to be reduced to different competing areas of private security.
Yeah, it's when I started working on this whole homelessness project, the first people I talked to, and I never heard anything like this in all the years I've covered Main Street, were Main Street business owners, and they said it has gotten so bad with the homeless harassing their customers and making their business district have a bad image because people are being accosted, that they would love to just hire a private police officer or two to just go around the block at night when people are there to dine and go to bars and just keep an eye on things. And they said it's just not happening. And the Pioneer Park Coalition, does your group have a relationship with SLCPD? Have they voiced these concerns to them?
I'm not aware of a formal one that we have formally set up. I know individually, lots of us have individual relationships with individual officers.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are long-standing friendships, sometimes more than anything else.
So you're friends with some police officers who are around and trying to make a difference, I suppose, and yeah. So what do you think that this plan is going to do in terms of helping your neighborhood?
It's hard to say for me. I have to sort of like dial back out of the thinking about Ballpark in particular. Mm-hmm. I think more than anything else, what it's going to do is open up the conversation with stakeholders. I'm sort of entering into this plan with a growth mindset, and I'm not going to be too focused on a lot of the individual details. I think what this plan does more than anything else is focus on, we need to agree that what we're doing now isn't working. We need to come to a pretty firm agreement on that.
Absolutely.
And that we need to address these problems in a fundamentally different way, not like small tweaks, but some kind of fundamental change. I think once we start there, then we can come to someplace more serious. The public encampments are hard to see. I think as long as we keep allowing public camping, it's hard to imagine real movement on the public safety situation in Ballpark.
Do you think the sanctioned campgrounds idea is a good one?
I'm really interested in exploring it. I know lots of cities have done different versions of that model and have found some kind of success in it. I've spoken with city council members in Denver, and they have claimed some success. I know others have gone to San Antonio and thought that their model was successful. If I could trade the unsanctioned camps that I see in my neighborhood for a sanctioned camp, I don't know why I wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few months after I was covering this, there was a unsanctioned camp, but it was huge, and it was under the freeway at 600 South.
Camp Last Hope.
Yeah. And it was managed, and I walked through it. It was relatively clean, and they had a dumpster donated. They had a trailer for warming people and for charging cell phones. And then they were bulldozed out like all other homes. And this is a place where they can actually go and feel safe.
Right.
And I was like, what the hell is going on? This is like a model that could work. It's not pretty, of course. It's a homeless camp. But why not at least do something like that instead of allowing people to camp, destroying neighborhoods and destroying Main Street?
Right. And why wouldn't you want to support something like that with safety and additional resources?
Add an additional element of safety of a security guard or more. That blew my mind.
And naloxone. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can all think of additional resources that could be helpful to a situation like that. Although, I mean, I agree. I never visited that camp personally. I watched, plenty of live video footage from it, and I agree that I was surprised by what I saw in terms of how well it seemed to function.
Yeah, and an actual place where a number of the residents had jobs and felt safe leaving their things behind. I mean, that's the biggest problem. If you're unsheltered homeless, you cannot leave your stuff ever. And they don't, and so they can't get jobs. And so a lot of them either get victimized, or they start using drugs, or they feel trapped. And very few of them have any family support structure in place anymore. And so you feel for these homeless people, and especially the unsheltered ones, because I can't imagine wanting to be inside of one of these resource centers after the descriptions I've heard of what's going on inside. And so I just think you guys are doing a great job coming up with this plan, working together, especially getting the voices from your community council, as well as the I think it was the Yale Harvard or something.
Yale-Crest,
that they were there.
That's an unusual voice to be part of that, isn't it?
I can't imagine they're up there, but I guess there must be an issue up there as well. But.
No, but what I don't think that they're experiencing a great deal of unsheltered, problems in the Yale-Crest community. Yeah. But they are part of the conversations about what are we going to do about housing inequity in this city.
Yeah.
And I think we've all been part of conversations about social justice in the past few years, to the extent that folks weren't a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I hope people understand that this is that discussion, right?
Yeah, so. It seems like when you say the term social justice, the knee-jerk reaction is greater rights for the homeless. How would you define what that is?
It's a pretty broad-reaching. I don't know. It's more like a definition of exclusion, not like a definition of,
Yeah, it's a tough one.
But I would say, to even just looking at just my fellow residents of District 5, I ran for city council last year, right? And some people, so Amy Hawkins is talking about public safety again, and I don't know why. I live in District 5, and I don't experience anything like that. Like, of course you don't. You live near 1300 East. Your situation is fundamentally different than mine. My colleague who was on right before this, Jim, he found some data that we didn't have access to last year that separated out different kinds of crimes. Instead of just by different district in Salt Lake City, it separates them out by neighborhood. So you could look at, instead of just District 5, you could look at Ballpark versus Liberty Wells versus East Liberty Park. And when you do that, then the story becomes a lot easier to see, and it shows very clearly, the crime rate in Ballpark, depending on the month, is 10 to 15 times that of East Liberty Park. It's logarithmically different.
Wow.
So of course your experience in East Liberty Park, of course what I'm saying sounds ridiculous to you and doesn't resemble your experience. It demonstrably doesn't resemble your experience.
Mm-hmm. And who is the city council person for District 5?
That'd be Council Member Darren Mana.
Is he trying to get more law and order in your district right now? Is he fighting for that?
No.
Wow. And he lives in that district, though.
Yes.
Huh. Well, good luck to you. Have you considered just moving?
Yes.
Well, I guess that remains to be seen if you go forward, but are you committed to the district, or you think you'll if this continues the way it is, you'll just up and leave?
I don't know. I can be committed to the district, right? But that's different than being committed to the neighborhood. If I move 2 miles east, I could be having a data-driven, demonstrably different experience.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to stay where I am for all the reasons that I originally described to you, right? I would like to be able to continue my backup plan of oh, look at the weather. I want to take tracks in to my office at the U, because now it's the post-pandemic era and I have to go teach students in person again. Hooray! Isn't that refreshing?
Yeah.
So refreshing.
Yeah. You can just sit here. It's great.
But I think it's going to be real dependent on thinking about how's the next year going to go. Where are our unsheltered populations going to be housed in Salt Lake City?
Yeah.
Frankly, a month after the Gail Miller Homeless Resource Center opened, an overflow shelter was proposed for half a block from my house on Main Street, at a former liquor store at about 1450 South Main Street. And the city, then there were back steps real fast, but mattresses had started being stored there. It was very curious. The Salt Lake Tribune called me up and said, "Please comment on this." And I said, it was shocking, for many reasons, but one of which it was within half a block of where 4 homicides had happened in less than a year. And I said, this is putting an overflow shelter in this spot in the Ballpark neighborhood is just about one of the worst.
Yeah, that sounds like you're there. If you want to make the neighborhood the worst neighborhood possible, that's what you would do.
Well, also, if you
shelter.
wanted to put people experiencing homelessness in one of the already least safe parts of Salt Lake City, and you wanted to, make them even
and just
more unsafe.
Have everybody who's normal, who's got an opportunity to leave, that's what you would do.
Yeah. So that, we pushed back and asked then Councilmember Mendenhall to please, on our behalf, push back for us. That was about a month before she was elected mayor. And she did. And we appreciated that because, we asked her to say, this is not the scattered site model that the state committed to. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy that, we have that letter, because it's important that we have it in writing that Mayor Mendenhall has committed to the scattered site model before. But darn if we didn't get another overflow shelter proposed for our neighborhood again last year at Brooklyn Avenue. So I wonder how often we're going to have to push back on getting overflow shelters in the Ballpark neighborhood.
Boy.
You know,
yeah,
I just
like
don't know.
Battle.
It's a little suspect, you know, given these. That's why I don't know. It's a little hard to look at these statistics and then think, you know, 2019, another overflow shelter proposed. 2021, another overflow shelter proposed for Ballpark. What?
Well, it seems like
What's going on?
They totally took advantage of your compassion to not push back on it originally. Like, you were a neighborhood who said, okay, let's see if we can make this place integrated in the community. Let's see if we can make it not degrade our neighborhood.
We did do that.
Yeah,
You can find multiple quotes from community members who said that to the Salt Lake Tribune and other news outlets. And
you did, and now as a reward for your compassion, you get more proposals for expansions and overflow shelters. That's like, obviously, they don't know what to do, and so it's like, I wonder if you look at the management of that shelter, the way it's being managed, do you feel like it's a breakdown in the management?
Why did we think that moving from the downtown road home shelter, a shelter that we all agreed, particularly based on Salt Lake County Mayor Ben McAdams' experience going through the shelter on a weekend, why did we think that new shelters should be run by exactly the same operators who ran the old shelter into the ground? Why did we think that was a good idea and that would serve justice and our unsheltered population?
That is a great point. Because it's the same staff, the same operators, the road home.
Yeah.
So if you could, would you just bring in a new operator?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we might need to look at oversight in Utah. I think we might need to look at oversight of homeless services in Utah and look at who's on what board. And, you know, there are a lot of folks who have been on the same oversight boards for a long time, who are friends with the right people, and, you know, I don't know, it's a small lake city.
Yeah. I agree. It's a good old boys club, and it's a very turf oriented community. Like, just the coverage I've been doing, I've gotten ad hominem attacks on me because we're talking about it. We're bringing up, I think, what is the most important conversation right now. What do we do? How do we stop this? And what are the best ideas? And it seems like, of course, the status quo doesn't want to see it changed because they're making money, and there's a lot of people in admins who are administrators who like their jobs and don't want to change. But it's absolutely time things change. It's just, and so next week on the program, Bob, what's his last name?
Are you referring to Bob Danielson?
Bob Danielson, yeah, is coming on, and he is extremely vocal about what's going on at Gail Miller, and Gail Miller is a wonderful person, and she's so philanthropic. I think she should be concerned about how her money is being spent. I think that's a huge amount of money from her being donated to run that place. And for her sake and everybody else's sake, I hope things improve. And I applaud you for standing up and having the courage to speak out about it, because I know a lot of people aren't.
I wish I had hope that this is... I am hopeful that this will change things. I want to be... That's not true. I want to be hopeful that this will change things. That's more accurate.
That's exactly how I feel. I want to be hopeful too.
Uncomfortable laughter.
And if you want to be hopeful too, then share this episode. Share what Amy has to say. Share what the Pioneer Park Coalition is doing, because status quo is not working, folks, and it's time we change things. So thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Our brand new issue of Utah Stories magazine just is hot off the press right now. It's our Cheers and Bon Appetit issue, and it's got a bunch of really cool Halloween-related stories, including our scary housing market story, scary things that are happening in Utah concerning the housing market, how and why just luxury apartments are being built and why affordable housing is not being built. We get into that, as well as unsolved mysteries. There are cold case files that in a database that have been released by the Salt Lake City Police Department on mandate by the state legislature. Pamela Manson gets into that. And just a bunch of awesome articles. Golda and Connie came up with these, and they found the writers to produce them. And you're going to love it. And so if you want to subscribe to Utah Stories magazine, it is $2 a month, $24 for the entire year. You can go to utahstories.com and hit the subscribe button, and that helps support this show and helps us get the voice of local Utah out to you. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.